So that's enough about pure technology for the moment. So if you don't use any vendors for your training at all, you now have probably about 2 minutes or so to refill your coffee. But if you're like most organizations, you probably rely on an outside company for at least some of your content delivery and platform elements. In that case, you need to make sure that your vendors are addressing and appropriately supporting the issues that we're discussing today. Specifically, you'll want to understand their international experience, language and cultural capabilities, technical infrastructure, and of course, legal compliance. So even the simple act of hiring a vendor in a local market may subject you to additional legal standards or requirements that you're not even aware of. Consider how your vendor is structured for international business. Do they use independent agents? Are they franchised rather than corporate-owned? These are simple questions that you might wonder why you're asking them, but you'll be surprised when you do global training rollouts that these simple factors can very directly impact the way that your vendors service you and ultimately sometimes the success of your overall training rollout.
Another question has come up, and I'm hoping that David or Casey, you can answer it. And it's whether there are any standards for international training or any standards for assessments on the international level.
When it comes to assessments such as personality inventories or any other type of measure of opinions like engagement surveys, there are some standards that have been developed by an organization called the International Test Commission. And their standards are essentially best practices when working internationally. More specifically, if you're working in Europe, there are a couple of associations that set standards for psychological measures across the European continent. And their standards are very similar to those of the International Test Commission. We can include links about those standards in the information that you'll receive.
You know, Sean, that is a good question. In fact, I've seen other areas besides international assessments where this is in fact true as well. Now, I was just reading a new report on the top 10 trends in learning management systems, and it identified vendors' inadequate global capabilities as a major issue in the next few years. Their point, and mine too, is that while vendors often bring valuable content, delivery expertise, and local market experience, and perhaps even an in-depth understanding of your organization, make sure that your partners are strategically aligned and operationally capable to be able to meet all of your needs. So now let's move on and talk about our fifth challenge when you think about global training logistics. And while logistics may not be the most strategic part of a global training program, it can absolutely determine the ultimate success or failure of your efforts. And let me share with you, in my experience, that international logistics are exponentially more complicated. So consider how your organization, or in some cases your vendor, will address just the simple issues. Things like printing, shipping, getting materials through customs, and let's not forget the all-important taxation. How is training delivery going to occur in all the different geographies and languages? How are you going to evaluate the program to make sure it's having the intended impact and be able to compare efforts in the different locations worldwide? And while this could be a webinar topic of its own, I at least want to mention the need for business continuity and disaster planning. Are your global training efforts documented at a detailed level so you understand what could go wrong? And do you have an appropriate system with redundancies and contingencies in place in the event a man-made, natural, or even a technological challenge arises? This is another area where our customers have influenced TRACOM in our actions. We've documented every business process, and we've curated contingency plans to ensure appropriate performance and response to meet our client needs. Depending on the nature of your training program, you need to determine what level of outages are acceptable and then develop or require contingencies that will meet your standards. For example, you could probably deal with your vendor software being down for an hour, but what happened if it was out for a day or even a week? If you've hired a smaller company or if their trainer becomes ill, what do you do then? What backup do you have? You know, are your programs going to be able to run?
I'd like to again involve Graham Price from Accelerate UK in London for his perspective.
When it comes to logistics, there's been so many different things that are happening these days, certainly in Europe as well. The austerity measures in many countries are causing issues such as frequent transport strikes, which always have got to have a bearing on where you're delivering training, and also elements out of our control. I mean, the recent Icelandic volcanic ash cloud that came over Europe made real differences. Some of the other trends we've noticed around logistics as well is we're increasingly running programs in company offices and not hotels or training venues. And this has its own issues as well, especially when it comes to space. I think another issue that we're increasingly becoming aware of is organisations looking to cut things like travel costs, and that means they're looking for local suppliers. I think the days of flying in trainers from around the world or even different parts of the country, especially in Europe, are disappearing fast. I think it's important to partner with training organisations that really want to work with you. It's a case of them adapting to what you need as opposed to taking their way or the highway. One of the other things I've noticed is that we tend to leave our hotel bookings directly to clients to organise. And this has meant that increasingly the grade, but not necessarily the quality of those hotels, has gone down. One of the things we've noticed as well is that clients are less likely to pay for travel time as well. And I think this all comes back to thinking about the environmental impact that travel has as well. I think this trend for in-house training is nothing new. And I think people are looking for high-quality products that they can deliver. And where they may have used someone else to come in the past, these days it's about delivering stuff internally that is of high quality and high value. One of the other things that we've noticed, certainly in Europe, is the trend towards more one-day and half-day programs as opposed to multi-day programs. And the trend to smaller facilitated groups as opposed to large audiences.
Carlos, do you have any final thoughts that you could share with our audience based on your experience living and working in countries outside of the United States?
Well, in that particular area, what comes to mind is the fact that American companies have a mindset of things that they want to do, that they want to achieve, and they carry that mindset overseas. Really, unless you've lived in those countries, unless you've been there meaning living there more than a year or 2 years, it is very difficult to take our mindset and make it work there. It is best to rely on the local culture. It is best to rely on the people that are there to make sure that the adaptations are properly made so that the doing of the business in these countries really takes place in such a way that things move quicker, easier, and impact the bottom line a lot faster than trying to impose the American mindset.
Thanks, Carlos. So we've covered a lot in this webinar. To review, there are 5 major categories of challenges facing organizations attempting to do global training, from organizational issues to content, systems, logistics, and even the roles of vendors. Success requires consideration of these issues in developing appropriate plans. The white paper you'll receive on Monday will give you some additional background and detail on these challenges. We're going to start our Q&A shortly, but I wanted to reiterate the benefits that come from successful global training. So when you navigate some of the hurdles that we've discussed and you're successful, you can achieve some very important outcomes for your organization. Specifically, when you get good at global training, you can provide your organization a vehicle to institute and communicate a global culture and an identity for the organization at large. By doing global training well, you can create a common set of performance standards and expectations worldwide, leading to better results for your organization. Today, working globally is very important, and when you implement training programs that are the same on a worldwide basis, it leads to standardized, efficient processes that are transferable across locations and creates a better international working environment for those virtual teams that we all have. You're able to create a consistent and fair leadership development process worldwide, developing the leaders of tomorrow for your organization. So when you do global training well, you'll find that your organization's productivity and performance will increase, and you'll attain a very high level of consistency. Thank you very much for attending our webinar today. Now we'd like to throw the floor open for questions and answers.